Welcome to Darwin Day. My name is Alex and I like ants. I run the University of Texas Insect Collection, which is based in the Bracken Ridge Field Lab complex of buildings in West Austin. And we have about 2 million specimens for research housed there. And my favorites are the ants, and that's what we're going to talk about this morning. So raise your hand if you've ever seen an ant. Yep. Okay. How about a fire ant? Have you ever been stung by a fire ant? Yeah, a lot of people. Yeah. So there are. If we had to know just a few things about ants, one thing to know is that there are lots and lots and lots of different kinds of ants. They can be as big as your thumb or as small as a speck of dust. They live in Africa and North America and New York City and Europe. They live all over the world. They live everywhere except one continent that, oddly enough, has the word ant in it. Does anyone know the continent that has ant? Yeah? Antarctica is the one place that doesn't have ants. It seems really unfortunate, but you'll find ants everywhere, and some of them are green, some of them are red, some of them are brown. They're just many, many different kinds. In fact, there are about 4 times as many species of ants as there are species of all mammals. So if you think about the African elephant and the lesser brown bat and the blue whale and the white-tailed deer, for each one of those, there are going to be 4 ant species. So we're talking about a lot of different kinds of animals. Here's just a sampling of a few of them here. Is this an ant? Yes. Yeah. So I'm gonna tell you how you recognize an ant from something that's not an ant, and then we're gonna go through a few pictures, and I want you guys to tell me if what you think is in the picture is an ant or something that's not an ant. So I'm going to tell you, here's the secret to figuring out if an insect you're looking at is an ant. The first thing you look at are these antennae, these feelers that stick out the front. What do you think those feelers are for?
Look around to move.
Yeah, they move them, and yeah. For smell, yes. Ants really like to smell things, and this is sort of the ant nose, and they got 2 of them that they wave around. But the thing that makes an ant, one of the 2 things, is the first part of the feeler of the antenna is just one long stick, and then the rest of it is all these little kind of floppy segments. And so ant antennae are sort of like your arms or the elbows, where the first part is like a stick, and then the rest of it is sort of floppy. So you see this long straight bit and then these little floppy little bits. That's the first thing. The other thing is you look at the waist here, and it's very skinny. And it's not just skinny, it's got a little bead segment, at least 1, sometimes 2 little segments here. So you see it is just this little bead that sits in the middle of the waist. And that is one reason why fire ants are such good stingers, because that means that they can point their butt end in almost any direction. So it's very, very helpful for an ant to have that little bead-like segment. They're very flexible. Ants are good at touching their toes and that kind of thing as a result. So that's an ant. It's got these elbow-like and these arm-like antennae, and it's got that little bead-like waist. Are these ants?
No.
No. Why not? Why are these not ants?
They're termites.
They are termites.
Because they don't have the antennas.
Exactly. They don't have the antennas. You see how these antennae are very straight? They're just a bunch of segments. And also, do you see a very narrow waist with a little bead in it?
No, we see like a kind of skinny waist, but also very chunky.
Yeah, it's very chunky. So these are termites. These are not ants. They kind of fake you out, though, because they live in big family groups like ants. Is this an ant?
Yes. Yes, it's a queen.
Yes. Oh, very good. This is a queen ant. How do we know it's an ant?
Tiny beads.
Okay, we can see that little bead-like segment in the waist, and we see the antennae having that long segment. Yes, so this is an ant. Is this an ant?
No.
No, it is not an ant. You guys are sharp. This is something that is called a velvet ant, but it's not actually a real ant.
It looks like a dust mite.
Yeah, it's these things run around in the desert at night, and you can see the antennae are kind of wrong. It doesn't have a really long first part of the antenna, and it doesn't have a really distinct bead in the waist. A lot of people think these are ants, but these are not ants, and they also live by themselves, so they're not like ants that you find in large groups. All right, how about this one? Is this an ant?
Yes.
Yes, this is an ant, but
Historically.
yes, this is a 90-million-year-old insect in amber, and you look at it, and it is not really clear, is it an ant or is it not an ant? Because there are good ways to think of it one way or the other.
The bead.
Yeah, it does have the bead, very clearly has the bead. The antennae, though, are sort of part way there, right? They've got this kind of a longish first segment, but most of it is this floppy thing. The antennae, can you go back a slide? The antennae of this thing look a lot more like that, but the waist of this thing looks a lot more like an actual ant. So this is the sort of, this fossil ant, it's from New Jersey of all places, 90 million years old, is a great example of an old fossil that's sort of halfway between one group of animals and another. So anyway, it turns out that this thing is an ant because when they discovered more fossils later, they discovered them in groups doing things that ants do. But it was kind of a puzzle.
When was that found?
That was found in 1967. I think it was a shopping mall that was going in, and so they were digging this big pit that exposed a bunch of amber. And so they discovered some interesting things. Just yesterday, a new paper was published on more ants that look a lot like this one that were discovered in China from 99 million years ago, a little older, that are very similar to this one. It's pretty exciting. I haven't read the paper yet. But we've talked about how you can tell if an insect is an ant or not an ant and using what they look like. But the thing that makes ants really interesting is that they're like us. They live in these big social groups. So this is sort of the other way that you can recognize an ant, is that they live in big colonies. Now, I want you to look really closely and tell me if you think you can see the queen.
I see it over there.
Which, is it like this one?
No.
No?
There.
This one? Oh, the big one. Nice. What does a queen do?
She produces the eggs.
She produces the eggs. Very good. There's a trick answer to this question that some people say, and they say, she's in charge. That's actually not true. The queen is the mother. This is a big family, and these are all her daughters. These are all female. These are all girls. So
Family of billions and billions.
could be, yeah. Actually, if you guys haven't had a look at the leafcutter ant colony here, mature colonies of these can have millions of individuals in them that are all they're all from one queen mother. Anyway, so this is a very typical ant colony. The queens are usually quite a bit bigger. All right, this is another species. Which one is the queen?
The big one.
Yeah, the big one right there. Next slide.
It looks like one is like digging into it, the one on top.
Yeah, this is kind of funny.
Looks like there's ripples in the skin.
Yeah, I've wondered about that. I think that's kind of an accident here because queens of this species are sort of rippled, but the interesting thing about queens is the other ants, we were talking earlier about what antennae do, right? What do antennae do? They smell, and this is how ants know which ant is the queen. I mean, we can see this picture and go, oh, that one's big, but these ants are mostly living underground in complete darkness. They have no way of seeing that she's big, but what they do is they smell her, and she smells very particular, and parts of her body produce odors, produce the smell, and I think that's what this ant is doing, is tasting something from a gland on the back of that queen. A lot of people think, there's the queen ant, but it turns out that in many, many, many species, maybe half of all ant species, there are many queens. And so sometimes if you're out there in the woods...
Those are all queens?
These three are queens. So instead of being one family with one mother and lots of daughters, a lot of ant colonies are in fact a bunch of sisters who are queens and their daughters, or some of the queens are daughters of other ones. And so it's very common in ants that you have these families that have lots of queens in them. In fact, if you look at one reason why the fire ants in Texas are particularly nasty is the colonies here have many queens in them, which means they can lay a lot of eggs, which means they grow much more quickly than fire ants in some other places do. If I talked about the queens, what are these ones, these little ones? Yeah. Who isn't? Yeah. These are worker ants. Yeah, and what do worker ants do?
Build a nest.
They build the nest. What is this ant doing? Yeah, very good. It's building a nest. This ant is carrying a bit of dirt. Now, can you see this little segment here? That's how you know it's an ant. That and those antennae again. Yeah, okay, so that's a worker ant. What else do worker ants do?
Get stuff for food.
They get food for the queen, yeah. Yes, this is one thing that worker ants do. They're the ones who are going out and getting food. What is this ant doing?
Getting the eggs.
If you open up an ant nest and you see big ants and little ants, the little ants are not the young ants. Anything that looks like an ant with legs like that is already at its full grown-up size. These little things are like the ant version of caterpillars. So ants, when they're young, look like these little grubs, and the worker ants are the ones in the nest that take care of the grubs. That is a cookie. And I was watching, this photo's from Brazil a few years ago, and I was sitting on a porch watching ants eating a cookie, and a bit of the cookie fell on the ground, and ants love cookies, and so they started coming out to carry out the bits of the cookies away, and I ran and grabbed my camera.
That's a bit of cookie?
That's a bit of cookie. These are very small ants. These particular ones are tiny little. Yeah, I think this looks like one of those cookies that probably has caramelized sugar in it to give it that brown color when it cooks. All right, here's one of these ants where I mentioned that they have that bead-like waist. Some ants have two, not just one. So you can see here that's one of the ones that has two. Oh, here's something I wasn't going to talk about, but I'm going to. So the stomach of an ant, who knows where the stomach of the ant is? Is it up here? Is it here?
On the bottom.
Yeah, on the bottom. It's right here. This is the stomach of an ant. So, do you think if this ant were to eat this cookie, it could easily go into the stomach?
No.
No, because it's got to go. This is a really strange thing about ants. They have these waists that allow them to point their butt in any direction, but they can't eat things like cookies. So why are they carrying them off? So I'm improvising here because I just realized this. So yeah, these guys, do these little grubs have a narrow waist?
No.
No.
This looks like a black speck inside of like a grub.
Exactly. And that black speck, what do you think that black speck is?
Egg.
Inside, like what is the...
Belly.
That's the belly. Yeah, this is the stomach of the grubs. And so when you see ants carrying like a dead cockroach or a bit of cookie away into the nest, they're feeding those to the larvae. So the young ants are the ones that are actually able to eat the solid food. The adult ants can only eat liquids. So they can only eat things like honey and sugar water. So the young ants are very, very important. A colony would die without the young ants because they actually work to digest the food for most ant colonies. And they can spit out food to the grown-ups. So basically these young ones are eating the cookie as it comes in, and then they're spitting up a little cookie smoothie that the adults can then eat.
Ew.
What else do worker ants do?
Eat.
Eat, yes. And where do they find food? Everywhere. Yeah, so this is one other thing that the workers do. They're the ones out there finding food. One of my favorite scientific studies of all time, and it's so simple. The scientists took a bunch of dead bugs, like mosquitoes they'd squished, and flies, and stink bugs, and cockroaches, and went out into a forest and just dropped them. Just dropped all the dead bugs. All summer, they dropped thousands and thousands and thousands of bugs, and they just asked, what happened to those bugs? And in this study, it turns out that every single insect they dropped, every single one of these thousands, every single one was taken by an ant. And not just taken by an ant, but within 3 minutes. The longest that any bit of dead insect was on the ground in the forest was about half an hour. So that's one thing that ants are doing out there, we think of them coming into our kitchens and going to our picnics, they are also cleaning up everything that drops out of the trees. And these worker ants are just out there running around. This is a bug called a frog hopper, and it's a carpenter ant that's carrying it away. Okay, I just wanted to point out, sometimes if you open up an ant nest, this is really common to see with fire ants, if you just kind of knock the nest open, you'll see a few insects that have wings running around. You know what those are? Okay.
The warriors?
Not the warriors. You'd think, who here seen Ant-Man? You guys seen Ant-Man yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you see like Ant-Man rides around in the back of winged ants. That's kind of funny because of what winged ants actually do. Yeah.
Aren't the winged ants like princesses kind of?
Yes, they are. And so while most of the ants you see are workers that never have wings, there are male ants, so there are boys, and the boys always have wings, and the queens have wings when they're young. And ants are terrible flyers. They run into walls, they're just really clumsy. That's why I thought Ant-Man was so funny. Like, if you're going to fly in the back of an insect, why would you pick an ant? They're just, they're so clumsy. But queens, when they're young, this is an old queen, she has these scars on her back where wings used to be from when she flew in to where she started this nest. And that's a boy ant right there, and he always has wings.
So her wings fall off when she gets the older she gets?
Yes, so her wings will fall off. So queens usually start, and you can actually see in the box over here, there's some ants that have wings and some that don't have wings. And the winged ones are the young queens and males. Anyway.
Excuse me?
Oh, sure.
So what are those orange things?
Oh, what are the orange things? So they're cocoons. So ants... we think of, do you guys know what silk is? You know where it comes from? It's like, we typically think of a particular species of moth that spins a cocoon, and then there's these factories that unwind the cocoons, and then they take the silk and they make, well, lots of insects make silk, and ants are one of those insects. And so in many species, when the larvae get big enough to turn into a pupa, this is like a butterfly. Butterflies, they have the caterpillar and the chrysalis and the adult. Ants have the grub and then the pupa and the adult. And the pupa is often inside the silken cocoon that is spun by the ants themselves.
Why is it orange?
That I don't know. Why is it orange? There are a lot of species related to this one that have sort of orange cocoons. Most often they're sort of whitish yellow. But yeah, I don't know why it's orange.
That makes me not want to eat sugar.
Yeah, these are probably not carrot-eating, ants. These are predatory, so who knows? I don't know. It's a good question.
What happens to the queen after it dies off?
In most ants, when the queen dies, the colony dies. But here's the thing. How long do you think a queen ant can live? Pretty long time. 30 years in some species. Yeah, that's how long they've lived in a laboratory. There might be ants colonies that are a lot older than that. So they can live, queen ants can often go for a good long time. Anyway, yeah, so there are ant colonies out there and ant queens that are older than a lot of you guys. Probably not older than me. All right, I just want to talk about a few other things that ants do that they're important. So ants, I mentioned that they're out there cleaning up all the things that die. They are also hunters. This is one of my favorite Texan ants. This is one that's found from San Antonio south called the tiger ant. And they love to hunt caterpillars. Ants are often really good hunters because they'll hunt in groups. And here is a vicious little ant called Azteca. And these Aztecas are taking down a big grasshopper. Ants will also, they love to eat this sweet thing called honeydew. Do you guys know what honeydew is?
You can get it out of your stuff.
Yeah. A hand up in the back. What's honeydew? It's what? Yeah, it's really sweet. It's like a sugar water thing. It is basically aphid poop. There are lots of insects that feed on plants, and then they get so many sugars from the plants they don't know what to do with it, so they just poop it out. And it's called honeydew, and here's an ant eating poop from that insect. So have you guys learned about earthworms, like how important they are in the soil? Well, I'm going to tell you that actually where we live here in Texas, ants are what does that, and they're much more important than earthworms are here. Like the earthworm story is great. It's northern Europe, Canada, those temperate, north temperate boreal areas. Here in Texas, if you walk around the forest and you see little piles of dirt, what's digging them up? Ants. And so our forests are full of ants that are taking up soil from deep, deep underground and bringing it up to the top and dumping it. And they do this so much that over time, the soil just kind of churns through. Like this is just a common cornfield ant. Yeah, Beckett.
So if you trained an ant to dig something, you dig down, way down.
You could actually. Some of the ants here can go 10 meters or more. That's like more than the length of this room underground. And some archaeologists are starting to go through, particularly desert ants, go to their nests and just sort of pick through the dirt at the surface because it's stuff that's being brought up from layers that are much deeper underneath. It's often why if you see a pile of ant dirt, it's a different color than the soil around because they may have gone down a few layers. Yeah, so these leafcutter ants, like I said, I've got a colony over there, are particularly good at this. Here's a colony in Argentina that's just massive. And if you fly high up in an airplane or you look down at this habitat from space, next slide, you can see the ant mounds all across the landscape. And these ants are really helping build this whole forest because of the way that they're churning the soil through. So very important animals, very good diggers. So ants are everywhere and they do all sorts of great things. Because of that, a lot of other animals like to look like ants. Which one of these things, I'm going to tell you, one of these things is an ant and one of these things is not. Which one is the ant?
The bottom one.
Yeah, the bottom one is the ant. How can we tell?
Beads.
Beads, and it's got the antennae with the long first one.
And is that one of those desert?
No, this is actually something called a twig ant that I haven't talked about. This one here is, what is this animal?
Mammal?
It is not a mammal or an insect. If you count the legs, it's an arachnid. Very good. You guys are clever. This is a spider, and it is trying to look like an ant. It's taken its first pair of legs to make fake antennae, and it's painted its abdomen to make it look like it has a narrow bead-like waist when it doesn't. There's a lot of animals out there that are trying to look like ants. When I first saw this animal, I was in Belize, and a guy named Brendan, who's 14 years old, comes up to me and he says, "I think this is a spider." And I said, "No way, that's an ant. It's a twig ant. It's a long blah 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 blah." And then the thing jumps off his arm and leaves a silk line just dropping down. I was like, "Oh, never mind, don't listen to me. You were right." These things move just like ants. They look just like ants. All right, and so there's so many animals out there that are trying to look like ants, not just that spider. Here's one from town. Here's a beetle that has painted white marks on its back, or it's got colors on its back to mimic that waist, that narrow waist of an ant.
Does it look anything like it because of the antennas?
Yeah, you're right. So once you get close, you realize that this thing is...
It looks too wide. Its belly is fatter.
Yeah, it's fatter than the ant. So these ones, once you get close, you're right. You're like, aha. But there's another one that is a bit harder to tell, and that's another local spider. I've seen these out of Hornsby. And if you guys know Hornsby Bend, you go out, I see these a lot of Hornsby Bend, where they look just like ants, and you get close, and you're like, oh, it's a spider. We're getting close to the end here.
I can see a difference. Like it has like those lines.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, once you know what to look for.
What's that supposed to be?
This is a beetle that lives in ants. I mean, ants are everywhere doing everything. They're eating all the food. Because ants are out there taking all the food out of the forest, a lot of animals have figured out that if they want to eat, the way to do it is to live inside the ant nest. And so there are all sorts of fantastic beetles and silverfish and cockroaches. In fact, there's a cockroach, I don't have any, but there's a cockroach here in Austin that only lives in nests of leafcutter ants. It looks like a little Pokemon figure. It's an adorable little tiny thing. Anyway, but if you look inside ant nests, you'll often find sneaky other things that are there stealing the food of the ants. Oh, and then there are things that attack ants. This fly is something called an ant decapitating fly. What do you think it does?
Kill ants.
It kills ants.
Decapitates ants.
Yes, and what does that mean?
Cuts off their.
Cuts off the head. Yes, this is an atrocious little fly, it kills the ant, but it doesn't directly cut its head off. What it does is it lays an egg in the ant, and its egg grows up into a little grub that eats the inside of the ant, crawls up into the head, then the head falls off. These are actually really common around here. They're just tiny, so you don't see them.
So it drops a little larvae and just once the insides goes up and then just. Would the ants still be alive when the insides have been eaten out, or?
It's still alive for a while, so it's got to be a pretty unpleasant thing.
It's probably going to be like a torture treatment.
Yeah, and then suddenly the head falls off and it dies. It's really gruesome. But these are really common.
It sounds like something from a horror movie.
It does. You should write it down if you guys are going to make your own horror movie. Okay, there's just another one of those little flies. Next slide. Oh, no. Next slide. There's some cool. These are just cool ants. These are ants that have a door made out of their own head. So these ants, you'd think, you see one of these and you're like, what the heck is this? It's called a turtle ant. And go back one.
It doesn't kind of look like a turtle shell.
Yeah, that's the ant right there. And it's made a door out of its head. And if you see it in side view, you can see that it's got the little antennae, and then it sort of is like a turtle, and it can tuck up into this little shell. And just when you thought they weren't any cooler, if you take a turtle ant and you knock it off a tree branch, it glides back to the tree trunk.
Because of its door.
No, it actually uses its legs, it turns out. This was a new discovery. People studying mosquitoes in the rainforest kept getting attacked by these ants, so they'd brush them off. And they noticed that the ants would not fall all the way down to the forest. They'd brush them off and they'd glide right back to the tree trunk. So then they abandoned what they were doing to the mosquitoes and started painting ants white and cockroaches and beetles and everything they could find. And they just started dropping everything out of the trees. And a lot of different insects turned out that insects that don't fly, like wingless cockroaches and silverfish and things, will actually glide back to the tree trunk. All right, I wanted to end with these ants. What are these? Okay, so why are they called imported? Because they're not from here. If you lived in Texas 100 years ago, you would have not seen many fire ants. There was a native species that was not very common, but fire ants are new here. They came through Austin in the 1980s. And it was amazing. Before fire ants, you could lay out in your lawn. Imagine that. This is a species that came here probably in a boat by accident. And I wanted to make sure you guys could identify these because we have about 100 ants, different ant species in Austin. And it's good to be able to recognize fire ants. The three things that you use to tell if you have a fire ant. One is how many different sizes of ants do you see here? Yeah, is there a little one? And there's a really big one, right? So fire ants are all different sizes. Like you see a trail and you'll see big ones and little ones and medium-sized ones all together. The other thing is people think, fire ants, they must be bright red, but they're not. They're sort of dull reddish brown like this. So they're a little bit red in the front and black in the back. And finally, they're very shiny. So you see these trails of ants that are really shiny. They're red and brown and they're all different sizes. That's a fire ant. Nothing else around here is going to have that look.
What about the completely red ants?
The completely red ants. There are several around here that are completely red. There are harvester ants. Those have a pretty painful sting. I'd say more so than the fire ants.
Yeah, because I've been stung by. I got stung by a red one and a fire ant in the same day, and that red one hurt.
Which one hurt more?
Well, they both made me kind of wish, but I think the red one.
Yeah, I would agree too. That's an observation. You get stung by a fire ant and you get stung by a harvester ant. Fire ants actually don't hurt that much compared to other ants. But when you get stung by a fire ant, you often get stung by 20, so there's that.
One tries to sting you and then the whole colony is stinging you.
Yes, whereas the red ants, they're less likely to attack you in a big group, but boy, it does hurt when they zing you.
Imagine if there was like a 100, there would just be one that were all hoarding on you.
Yeah, has anyone accidentally stood on a fire ant mound?
Yeah.
A lot of hands. I've done that, and it was funny because I'm an ant guy. I'm always paying attention to ant mounds. When I'm outside in a group of people, I watch people, and I know where all the ant nests are. And people they just like to stand on the high thing. You know, they don't realize they're doing it. They're walking along, they see a high thing, and they'll stand on it. Like, no. And they stand on. People stand on fire ant mounds all the time. So
And then next thing you know, you're being sent to the emergency room because you got like million stings.
Yes. Yeah. It's really, really kind of painful. All right. I think we have to move along, but are there any more questions about ants? Other insects? Well, thanks, guys. You've been really fun. And do check out our live leafcutter ants.